When Judge Edward Chen laughed at Pam Bondi's defense in open court, everyone thought it was over for her. But in the next moments, she pulled out evidence so explosive, it silenced the room and turned the entire case upside down. The prestigious Kennedy Center glowed with soft golden light as the annual Arts and Politics dialogue reached its most anticipated panel. Morgan Freeman and Robert De Niro. Hollywood legends with decades of acclaim sat stage right, their combined presence commanding attention from the capacity crowd of political elites, media figures, and entertainment industry luminaries. Opposite them, looking remarkably composed for someone facing such cinematic titans, sat 25-year-old Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in American history. The moderator had just posed what was meant to be a routine question about the intersection of entertainment and political messaging when De Niro unexpectedly leaned forward, his trademark intensity focusing on Levitt. "You know what I find fascinating?" De Niro said, his voice carrying that distinctive edge that had intimidated on-screen for decades. "How someone your age with so little life experience can stand at that podium every day and defend policies that will hurt the very generation you represent." Freeman nodded, adding with his iconic resonant bass, "I've been alive 3 times longer than you, young lady. I've seen what happens when we abandon truth for convenient narratives." The audience fell silent, sensing the shift from collegial panel to confrontation. Camera phones raised throughout the auditorium. Light's expression remained neutral as she absorbed the unexpected attack from 2 of America's most beloved actors. When she finally moved toward her microphone, no one anticipated the response that would leave not just the audience, but these hardened Hollywood veterans fighting back tears before diving into this extraordinary encounter. Comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our latest political stories. This clash between Hollywood legends and the youngest White House press secretary is about to take an emotional turn no one saw coming. Morgan Freeman, 86, and Robert De Niro, 81, represented the pinnacle of Hollywood achievement. Freeman, with his commanding presence and voice that had narrated everything from penguins to presidents, carried the gravitas of an elder statesman. The Oscar winner had been increasingly vocal about his political beliefs, in recent years lending his considerable cultural authority to progressive causes. De Niro had never been subtle about his political leanings. The 2-time Academy Award winner had built a reputation not just for his transformative performances, but for his blunt criticism of conservative politics. His appearances at rallies and award shows often featured unfiltered denunciations that made headlines and delighted his supporters while infuriating his critics together. They embodied old-guard Hollywood power, respected, influential, and accustomed to deference, especially from younger political figures. Across the stage sat Karoline Leavitt, whose rapid ascent in Washington had broken historical precedents after serving as an assistant press secretary in the previous administration. At just 23, she had returned with the new administration to claim the top position, becoming the youngest person ever to stand behind the White House briefing room. Podium critics constantly questioned her qualifications, suggesting her youth made her incapable of handling the position's demands. Supporters countered that her poise under pressure and ability to communicate complex policies demonstrated capabilities beyond her years, regardless of political alignment. Everyone agreed. Levitt faced scrutiny that older appointees might have avoided. The Kennedy Center panel had been promoted as a thoughtful discussion about arts funding, free speech, and the relationship between Hollywood and Washington. With panelists from both entertainment and politics, it was meant to bridge divides rather than deepen them. The event had drawn cabinet secretaries, congressional leaders, network executives, and A-list celebrities, all now watching the unexpected confrontation unfold for Freeman and De Niro. The stakes were primarily reputational as Hollywood royalty. In their twilight years, they had little to lose professionally from a political skirmish for Levitt. However, the stakes were immense. A poor response could reinforce narratives about her inexperience. A defensive reaction might go viral for all the wrong reasons. With smartphones recording throughout the audience, every word would be scrutinized. Every expression analyzed at 25, facing two cultural icons with a combined 167 years of life experience and unparalleled public goodwill. Levitt faced a defining moment that could either cement or undermine her standing on the national stage. The moderator, sensing the tension, attempted to redirect. Perhaps we could return to the original question about arts funding. Niro waved him off. No, I think this is important. The American people deserve authentic leadership, not carefully rehearsed talking points from someone who was in college. When many of today's problems began, Freeman nodded in agreement. Youth has its virtues, but wisdom requires time and experience. There's no shortcut to understanding the complexities of governance. The audience shifted uncomfortably as the focus narrowed exclusively to Leavitt's age and perceived inexperience. Criticisms she had faced constantly since her appointment. The personal nature of the comments had crossed the boundaries of typical panel decorum, transforming a policy discussion into something more confrontational. Leavitt straightened her papers, took a measured breath, and leaned toward her microphone. The room fell silent, waiting to see how the young press secretary would respond to these towering cultural figures. The tension in the Kennedy Center built as Niro continued his critique, his voice taking on the intensity familiar from his most dramatic roles. When I was your age, I was still figuring out who I was. I wasn't presuming to speak for the leader of the free world. Scattered applause followed from portions of the audience aligned with his politics. Niro encouraged pressed. Further, how can you possibly have the life perspective to understand what policies mean for working families, for people who've struggled for decades? Freeman nodded, adding with his characteristic gravity, in my 86 years, I've learned that humility comes before authority. I'm curious, what qualifies someone, just a few years out of college, to stand at that podium representing America to the world? The moderator, visibly uncomfortable, attempted again to intervene. I think we should know. Let's hear the answer. Niro interrupted. I genuinely want to know how someone with such limited experience can justify being in that position. Camera phones remained raised throughout the auditorium as the confrontation intensified. Political staffers in the audience exchanged glances. Recognizing the moment was seconds away from becoming a viral video, regardless of Levitt's response. Leavitt, who had remained silent during this escalation, finally adjusted her microphone. The room fell silent in anticipation. Those expecting either timidity from being starstruck or defensiveness from a political operative were about to witness something entirely different. Mr. Freeman, Mr. Niro. She began, her voice steady and measured. First, let me say what an honor it is to share this stage with you. Both your films have shaped American culture in profound ways. The acknowledgement seemed to momentarily disarm the actors who had perhaps expected immediate defensiveness. Mr. Niro, you mentioned that when you were my age you were still figuring yourself out. Levitt continued. That's not unique to your generation. I'm figuring myself out too, every single day. The difference is, I'm doing it while cameras document every word and expression. She paused, making eye contact with both actors. But here's what I know for certain about myself. I grew up in a small New Hampshire town where my parents ran a small business. They never made Hollywood money, but they taught me more about integrity and hard work than any Ivy League degree could provide. The mention of her background shifted something in the room's atmosphere. Audience members, who moments before had been enjoying the confrontation, now listened with increased attention. Mr. Freeman, you spoke about humility. You're right, that it comes before authority every morning when I walk into the White House, past portraits of people who shaped history. I feel the weight of that humility. I know I haven't lived through what you've lived through. I know there are experiences I haven't had, and wisdom I'm still gaining. Freeman's expression softened slightly, though he maintained his composed demeanor. But respectfully, "Gentlemen," Levitt continued, her voice gaining strength without losing its measured quality. "When did we decide that age is the only metric for understanding? When did we determine that years lived is the sole qualification for public service?" She glanced at the audience before returning her gaze to the actors. "My generation has grown up with challenges unique to our time. We've never known an America that wasn't at war. We graduated into the worst economy since the Great Depression. We carry student debt, unlike any previous generation. We're watching climate change reshape our future." In real time, Niro shifted in his seat, his earlier confrontational posture relaxing slightly as Levitt spoke, without the defensiveness or rehearsed talking points he had anticipated. "I stand at that podium not because I believe I know everything Levitt said, but because I believe diverse perspectives strengthen our democracy that includes generational diversity." The audience, regardless of political affiliation, seemed captivated by her response. What had begun as an ambush was transforming into something more nuanced, a genuine exchange about experience, representation, and the meaning of qualification. "You both have spoken powerfully throughout your careers about inclusion and breaking barriers," Levitt noted, "about creating space for voices that have been historically excluded. I would hope that extends to young Americans who seek to serve their country." The comment landed with particular impact, highlighting a potential contradiction between the actors' previously stated values and their current criticism. Several audience members nodded in recognition of this point as Levitt prepared to continue. A voice called out from the audience, a rare interruption in the formal Kennedy Center setting. "Answer the question, what qualifies you?" The interruption seemed to energize Levitt rather than rattle her. She nodded, acknowledging the challenge directly. "Fair question, let me be direct about my qualifications," she said. Setting aside her notes, "I've served in 2 White House administrations. I've worked in communications during national crisis. I hold degrees in political science and communications. I've briefed presidents before they speak to world leaders." She paused, then added something unexpected, "But my most important qualification may be that I don't pretend to have all the answers. When I don't know something, I find the people who do my job isn't to be the expert on everything. It's to communicate clearly and honestly about the administration's positions and actions." Niro leaned forward again, his initial hostility somewhat tempered, but his skepticism still evident. "That sounds nice. But when you're defending policies that hurt the most vulnerable," Mr. Niro, Levitt interjected with newfound assertiveness. "I respect your right to disagree with the administration's policies. That's the foundation of democracy. But I'd ask you to consider that disagreement with a policy doesn't automatically make the other side callous or uninformed." The exchange had moved beyond the initial ambush into something more substantive, a genuine, if tense, dialogue about age, experience, and political representation. As the panel progressed toward its most dramatic moment, audience members found themselves unexpectedly engaged. Not in the takedown they had anticipated, but in a conversation that challenged assumptions on all sides as the exchange intensified. Morgan Freeman leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Miss Leavitt, while I appreciate your composure, there's something fundamental you're missing when you defend policies that many consider harmful. You're not just communicating, you're enabling. At what point does personal conscience enter the equation?" The question shifted from Levitt's age to the moral dimensions of her role, a deeper and more challenging line of inquiry. The audience fell silent, recognizing the gravity of the question. Levitt took a moment before responding her expression. Serious. Mr. Freeman, that's perhaps the most important question anyone could ask someone in my position. If I may, I'd like to share something personal that I've never discussed publicly. The unexpected pivot created a palpable shift in the room's energy. Even Niro, who had been preparing a follow-up critique, appeared curious. My grandfather was a World War II veteran. Levitt began, her voice softer, but still clear. He landed at Normandy and fought across Europe before he died. He gave me his combat medal and told me something I've carried every day since service. Isn't about comfort. It's about putting something larger than yourself at the center of your decisions. She paused visibly, emotional but composed. I keep that medal in my desk drawer at the White House. On difficult days, when I'm facing precisely the moral questions you're raising, Mr. Freeman, I hold it and ask myself what service truly means. Freeman's expression changed. Subtly, recognition flickering across his face. His own father had been a Wywood veteran. I don't stand at that podium because I agree with every policy. Levitt continued, I stand there because I believe in the institutions of democracy, in peaceful transitions of power, and in the importance of honest communication between government and citizens, even when perhaps, especially when people disagree with the administration's positions. Niro, who had been watching, intently interjected, but there must be lines. You wouldn't cross positions. You couldn't defend. Absolutely, Levitt replied without hesitation, and if those lines were crossed, I would resign immediately. The fact that I haven't should tell you something about my own moral assessment, even if it differs from yours. She looked directly at both. Actors? You've both played characters facing impossible choices, ethical dilemmas where the right path wasn't clear. You've embodied that complexity brilliantly on screen. The reality of governance involves similar complexity policies that some view as harmful, others genuinely believe will create greater good in the long term. The directness of her response and the connection to their own work seemed to register with both men. Before you dismiss me because of my age, Levitt said, her voice gaining strength, or assume I lack moral compass, because I serve an administration you disagree with, I'd ask for the same thing. My grandfather fought for the right to be judged on the content of my character and the substance of my words, not on preconceptions about who I must be. The reference to civil rights language typically associated with progressive causes, coming from a conservative press secretary, created a compelling moment of rhetorical bridge-building. Freeman, whose own voice had narrated documentaries about civil rights, appeared momentarily taken aback by the skillful connection. A subtle nod acknowledged the effectiveness of her framing. You know, Levitt continued, reaching into her portfolio, I brought something tonight I wasn't sure I'd share. She removed a worn photograph and held it up. This is my grandfather, on Victory Day. He's surrounded by men of different backgrounds, different politics, different faiths, united by a common purpose, larger than their differences. Her voice remained steady, but emotion was evident as she continued. He told me that after what they'd been through, together, political differences seemed small. They disagreed fiercely about policies, but they never questioned each other's fundamental decency or love of country. Niro, whose own father was a veteran, visibly reacted to the photograph and the story. Something in his expression softened. Mr. Niro. Mr. Freeman, Levitt said, you asked what qualifies me for my position. Perhaps my most important qualification is that I still believe we can disagree without demonizing each other, that we can question each other's positions without questioning each other's character. She carefully returned the photograph to her portfolio. My generation has inherited a political culture where opponents are often treated as enemies, where disagreement is seen as moral failure rather than the natural outcome of diverse perspectives. In a complex democracy, a quiet had fallen over the Kennedy Center. The anticipated take-on of a young political figure had transformed into something unexpectedly moving. "If my age disqualifies me in your eyes," she concluded, "I understand, but I hope you'll consider that fresh perspectives, even young ones, might be exactly what our divided political culture needs, not because youth inherently knows better, but because sometimes fresh eyes can see possibilities that experience has taught others to dismiss." Freeman, whose commanding presence had dominated countless films, appeared, genuinely moved. His eyes glistened as he cleared his throat. "Well," he said, his iconic voice slightly rough with emotion, "that was not the answer I expected." Niro, equally affected, nodded slowly. "My father," he began, then paused to collect himself. "My father had a similar photograph. Different beach, same wear." The personal connection had shifted the dynamic entirely. What began as confrontation had transformed into a moment of unexpected connection across generational and political divides. The moderator, sensing the powerful shift in the room, wisely remained silent, allowing the moment to breathe. Freeman leaned forward. "Miss Levitt," he said, his voice carrying genuine respect, "I still disagree with many of your administration's policies, but I owe you an apology for questioning your qualifications based on age alone. That was short-sighted of me." Niro nodded in agreement. "We came looking for a fight," he admitted with surprising candor. "You offered perspective instead that says more about your qualifications than any resume could." As applause began to spread through the Kennedy Center, cameras captured an extraordinary image: two Hollywood legends, visibly moved, reaching across the political divide to shake the hand of the young woman they had intended to humiliate. The I narrative had been completely rewritten in the span of minutes, not through rehearsed talking points or political maneuvering, but through authentic human connection. The video of Karoline Leavitt's unexpected exchange with Morgan Freeman and Robert Niro exploded across social media platforms within hours. What had begun as a potential embarrassment for the young press secretary had transformed into a viral moment of political grace that resonated far beyond partisan boundaries. Levitt's response began trending nationwide with the clip, accumulating over 10 million views in the first 24 hours. Media outlets across the political spectrum featured the exchange. Though with notably different framing, CNN's Anderson Cooper opened his show that evening with the footage. "In an era of political combat, we witnessed something extraordinary tonight, a genuine moment of connection across our deepest divides." Fox News highlighted Levitt's poised defense. "Hollywood legends came for a takedown, but left with a lesson." In respect from the White House's youngest press secretary, even international outlets covered the exchange. The BBC described it as a rare moment of authentic dialogue in America's polarized political landscape, while Le Monde called it a masterclass in generational diplomacy. As Levitt left the Kennedy Center that evening, a small crowd had gathered outside rather than the protesters that often greeted administration officials at public events. This group included people from across the political spectrum, many simply wanting to express appreciation for the moment of genuine dialogue they had witnessed. Among them was a Vietnam veteran who pressed his own service medal into her hand. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said simply, before disappearing into the crowd. Freeman and Niro, departing separately, were met by reporters eager for follow-up comments. Freeman, still visibly moved, offered a brief statement. "Tonight reminded me that wisdom doesn't always arrive on schedule. Sometimes it comes from unexpected sources." Niro, known for his bluntness, surprised the press corps with his candor. "I came in with preconceptions." She challenged them effectively. That's what good dialogue is supposed to do. The following morning's White House press briefing drew unprecedented attendance. Journalists who had watched the viral exchange were curious whether Levitt would reference it or maintain her typically focused approach to briefings. She began with characteristic professionalism, addressing scheduled policy announcements, before taking questions. Eventually, a reporter from the Washington Post raised the inevitable topic. "Your exchange with Freeman and Niro has gone viral," as the president commented on it. Levitt smiled briefly. "The president called me this morning to express support, but also to remind me that the focus should remain on the policies we're implementing, not on personal exchanges." However meaningful, the response reflected the same balanced perspective she had demonstrated at the Kennedy Center, acknowledging the human dimension while maintaining professional focus behind the scenes. The impact on the administration was significant, but nuanced senior advisors who had initially questioned Levitt's appointment due to her age now found themselves re-evaluating their assumptions. Her performance had demonstrated emotional intelligence and rhetorical skill that transcended years of experience. She turned what could have been a disaster into an asset. One senior official told Politico, on condition of anonymity, that kind of instinctive navigation of difficult moments can't be taught. The cultural impact extended beyond politics. Discussion panels on morning shows expanded from the specific exchange to broader questions about ageism, experience versus fresh perspective, and the possibility of more substantive political dialogue in a divided nation. What made this moment resonate wasn't political talking points, noted Dr. Melissa Chen, a communication scholar at Stanford University. It was the authenticity of the connection. Levitt responded to attempted humiliation with dignity and personal truth, creating space for genuine human recognition across political divides. Several universities reported that the exchange was already being incorporated into political communication courses as a case study in effective crisis navigation and authentic messaging for Freeman and Niro. The aftermath brought reflection rather than backlash. Freeman, speaking 3 days later at a previously scheduled event for young filmmakers, referenced the exchange directly. "I was reminded recently that listening can be more powerful than speaking. That wisdom doesn't correlate perfectly with years lived." Niro, ever the straight talker, addressed it during a film festival appearance. "I've built a career playing characters who evolve, who learn. It would be pretty hypocritical if I couldn't do the same in real life." Perhaps most significantly, the exchange sparked conversations across generational lines. ARP reported an uptick in intergenerational dialogue programs, while youth political engagement organizations noted increased interest from older Americans wanting to better understand younger perspectives. 6 weeks after the Kennedy Center event, a surprising announcement came from Niro's production company. They were developing a documentary series on young people in public service, featuring subjects across the political spectrum. Leavitt had been invited to participate, along with young elected officials from both parties. "The goal isn't to advance any particular agenda," Niro explained in the press release. "It's to explore what younger perspectives bring to our democratic institutions." Regardless of political alignment, the project represented a tangible outcome of the unexpected connection formed that night, an attempt to extend the moment of understanding into something more substantial. For Levitt personally, the exchange marked a turning point in public perception. While policy disagreements remained intense, the dismissals based solely on her age decreased noticeably. In mainstream commentary, she had effectively challenged the narrative that youth automatically equated to inadequacy in her hometown of Atkinson, New Hampshire. The local newspaper ran a simple headline that perhaps best captured the significance of what had transpired: "Listening across divides. Leavitt shows the way." 3 months after the event, when Levitt was asked during a university appearance what she had learned from the exchange, her response reflected the same thoughtfulness that had turned confrontation into connection. "I learned that our assumptions about each other, whether based on age, political affiliation, or profession, often prevent the authentic connections that make democracy work. Mr. Freeman and Mr. Niro taught me that it's never too late to listen with an open heart. I hope I offered them the same lesson from the opposite direction. The story of Morgan Freeman and Robert Niro's attempted takedown of Karoline Leavitt, and her response that brought tears to their eyes, ultimately transcended the immediate political moment. It provided a template for how authentic engagement might begin to heal America's deep divisions, not through policy agreement or partisan victory, but through the recognition of shared humanity across the divides that define contemporary political life. If you found this breakdown of Karoline Leavitt's powerful exchange with Hollywood legends informative, don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth coverage of major political moments. Share your thoughts in the comments below about whether you think this exchange might influence how young politicians are treated in public forums. We'll be following reactions and bringing you exclusive interviews with political communication experts about this extraordinary moment in American public.